right, we'll go ahead and get started. Call today's work session to order. We'll start with our delegates, and Mr. Perez is going to handle the delegation statement. So if you are speaking today as a delegate, please give your attention to Mr. Perez.
Thank you for your interest in addressing the Hamilton County Board of Education. During your presentation, please address the board as a whole, not individual board members or administrators. Also, please do not present complaints or concerns you have about an individual employee of the school system. If you wish to voice those complaints and concerns, you should contact the central office and ask for a meeting with the superintendent, since the superintendent is responsible for individual employees. Please limit your remarks to 5 minutes. I will tell you when you have 1 minute left. You may begin when you're ready. The first person is Meg Day.
I'm Meg, and I've got 4 kids in Hamilton County schools, and I'm the type of mom that likes to drop them off in the morning to have a little extra time with them, but also I like to get a little extra of that school vibe. I pull up, and what I've blown away by is like how much it takes just to pull drop-off in the morning, and so what I'm starting to realize is there's like a lot that comes with running a school system, and I know and I don't know it's a lot. So thank you for your work there. I'm also the mom that sticks my head out the window and waves to any staff, thank you, and embarrasses all my kids. But nevertheless, thank you. And thank you for doing work on a cell phone policy. That's what I came to talk about. My younger children are not allowed to have cell phones at their school, and it's not really an issue. It's pretty shut down. But my oldest is in middle school, and they're allowed to take it at lunch. And so what's happened, right, is it's a little bit more than lunch. It's a little bit here and there because they're out. And so I came to ask you to make a policy that keeps phones put away for the whole school day. And I have 3 areas of concern. The first is just explicit material that he's been exposed to during the school day. It's pretty regular that we all have devices, and we know that sometimes we see stuff we don't want to by accident, and sometimes people bring stuff up purposefully or by accident, and they've been exposed to that as well. And we all have different rules for our kids' phones, so when they come together, we have no control of what's happening on those. The second area of concern is just the interruption to his education during the day. My children are like all other children, where focus and attention and hard work is something that we're working on as a family. And what has happened is it's a big interruption. It's a little bit more than just at lunch. And just because he might not have his phone that day, someone else might, and that phone is a disturbance, not just to the kid who has it, but the kids around them. And that is a big area of concern. And the third area is that even though they're allowed to have their phones, technically, that 25-minute lunch period, it's 100% of their free time during the school day. And that's where they do some of their social and emotional exercises and practice and working that out. And this has been a huge part of his experience, is during lunch, it plummets. The face-to-face interaction plummets because kids get on their devices and look at social media or games or what maybe just text a friend or something like that. But I know that y'all care about social emotional well-being because you're spending millions to put seed personnel in schools next year, which I'm super thankful and super pumped about. But we know that those seed personnel are not going to come in and say, hey, these kids need a little bit of their screen every day. It's really good for their social and emotional well-being. No, we want kids to practice. We want kids to engage. And just personally, that's one of the biggest things I love about public school is their exposure to people they might not meet and just their practice at being people. And those are the reasons I would just really ask for you to keep phones out of the school day as much as you can as a district. And I would invite you to do kind of what you did with the COVID task force, is not just to listen to parents or students, but to ask our professionals. Please ask your guidance counselors, your mental health professionals, your pediatricians, hey, is it good for kids to have devices during the day? Is it good for them to have their personal cell phones? What are the benefits there? Or would we keep education and its integrity intact if we kind of put a lot of barriers around there? So thanks again for making this policy and for all the work you do to pull off the school system. Thanks.
Ms. Candace Baker.
Hi, I'm Candace Baker. I teach first grade at Orchard Knob Elementary, and I just wanted to speak very briefly on the differentiated pay. And I typed it out to make it as brief as I could. I said, members of the board, thank you for hearing this issue, and I will, like I said, try to keep it brief. This is my third year at Orchard Knob, and that's for many reasons. I teach under an admin that I trust and that respect me and my opinions and my teaching practice. I teach kids that have unique passions and unique challenges. I don't have to list the challenges that we handle every day, but I do want to take a moment to highlight the students and families and the teachers of Orchard Knob that we love to serve. We have students that come to school and try to take a tour of the building to say good morning to every teacher. And at dismissal, I regularly joke with them that they don't have to say goodbye to their fans when their name is called. They love being there, even when they don't show it in the most positive way. We all have genuine relationships with our students and their families. Families aren't ashamed to call us and say, I need help. Their clothes aren't clean, their hair isn't done. Or I don't have a car, but I trust you when you say that they should be evaluated at the pediatrician. We've washed clothes, done hair, given rides, and even picked up the prescriptions for the families to deliver them to their house. We deliver Christmas presents, Thanksgiving dinners, and any teacher would call any student's parent if needed because we all have a stake in every student's success. We're at risk of losing some of the incredible educators that I work with every day. Some of the people at our school got a letter that they were losing their differentiated pay due to the LOE score of the school, averaging in with their score, bringing them to a 2. Some of us got letters saying that we were at risk for losing our differentiated pay because of our absences. I can only speak about myself, and so I will do that. I'm a foster parent. I've been a foster parent for the past 4 years, and I've had the honor of caring for over 25 children in my house over those 4 years. Oftentimes that comes with court hearings, meetings, doctor's appointments, sometimes even psychiatric stays that required me to take a leave of absence from work last year. Because I was not able to use FMLA time due to the 1,250-hour work requirement before I could use it, I'm at 9 absences this year. One of those absences was the adoption of my 17-year-old. A few weeks ago, I came to school feeling extremely sick because if I took one more day, I would lose my differentiated pay. Because I've now learned to budget my life around that extra $305 a month, I can't risk losing it. The board put differentiated pay in place as an acknowledgement that the challenges that we face at Hope and Promise schools are greater than at other schools. Not that the educators in the rest of the county work any less than we do, they just work under different circumstances. At any other school, a teacher would be able to take their 10 sick days and their 3 personal days without a dock in their pay. If I were to get another foster child, if one of my 3 adopted or my current foster child gets sick, or if I get sick myself, I'm not able to take a day off of work. We do incredible things in our building, and it would be a shame if we had any teachers choose to leave to work under different circumstances because we're not being compensated for work that the board has already agreed we do. One of the county's goals is to give all students access to high-quality teachers. And yes, of course, I am biased here, but the teachers at Orchard Knob are of the highest quality. I invite you to room 153 anytime to see the unique work that we do. I'm confident that the board respects us as educators and believes that we should continue to be compensated as such, and I encourage the board to reconsider the stipulations surrounding differentiated pay and reinstate it for those that have lost it due to those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you to our delegates. Okay, we'll move on to our presentations. Dr. Robertson is giving us an update on the strategic plan and the budget process.
Apologize that Mary Ellen, she's not here, so I will try to fill in for her, but she would have been much better. I gave you a couple of things. First, a copy of strategic plan that we rolled out last Thursday. For new board members, just a reminder, the way we go through budgeting process, we do priority-based budgeting. And so what that essentially means is the 5 commitments in Opportunity 2030 is we will show how every dollar that we're budgeting is attached to one of those 5 commitments, and that's called priority-based budgeting. So hold us accountable to that, ask questions about it. You know, if you think that something doesn't align properly, ask us to explain, but we'll align every dollar to one of the 5 commitments in Opportunity 2030. We are basically in the next week, we'll start the budgeting process, and that starts traditionally with community listening sessions. So I've given you a sheet that has the dates for 5 community listening sessions, 1 in each learning community, and then there's a 6th one on Wednesday, March 1st. That's actually going to be a virtual one at noon. So trying to provide as many options. It doesn't mean that parents can come to anyone. We're not trying to say if you're in Rock Point, you got to go to Rock Point. We're just trying to put them out in different parts of the county to make sure we get as much participation from the community as possible. And then that virtual one is to catch people that have a difficult time you know, getting to night events. So in total, 6 community listening sessions. We've done some work with different groups also to start that process. The next couple of months will obviously bring presentations of the budget, expected revenue, ideas of where we're going to be budgeting those dollars, give you plenty of opportunity to ask questions and you know, push us on decisions that are being made with the goal of getting budget approved in April so we can take it to the county commission from there. Any questions?
Yeah, on the virtual one, is that gonna be a Zoom sent out, or are you gonna, okay.
Yeah,
so
it'll be a
how
Zoom.
how is somebody gonna get that Zoom?
So they can go to the website at the bottom, and there should be a link under that virtual meeting. So the hcd.org/community and then 2023 budget meetings.
Okay.
Yes, Mrs. Jones?
How is this process coming along in the school setting with the administration? Is there,
In terms of the staffing model,
yeah, because I'm hearing a whole lot of different things.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to kind of get a little concerned that it might not be going as we thought it was going to go.
overall, I would say it's going well, but anytime you have a second order change, and this is a big second order change, you're gonna have different degrees of response to it, right? And so in some places, it's going really well. In some places, they're struggling with it a little bit. Overall, though, I think we're where we need to be. March 1st is a key date. That's when magnet schools, open enrollment, all that stuff kind of rolls out, and we'll have a clearer picture. Not only that, but also Title I dollars. A couple things that I heard when we first rolled out is that for Title I schools, there was a very large range of, dollar amounts that may be coming to the school. That's because we didn't have clear indication. By March 1st, we should have a much better indication of what schools will be getting for Title I. But overall, I would say it's positive. I've heard from a couple of you, and I've met actually with a couple of principals. We met earlier this week with some middle school principals and addressing a concern there. But overall, I would say it's going well. Heard from HR today that the seed position postings that we're starting to recruit some of the people that we expected and that we wanted. And so, yeah, we're with second order change, you're gonna have different levels of adoption. So there are some places struggling. We're working with those places, but then there are some people that are doing exactly what we hoped they would do.
Okay.
Mrs. Black?
I wanted, in this public setting, to clarify kind of what we talked about, I guess it was last week, around the special education allocation in the staffing model. Because I know there were some varying conversations between principals that I've been meeting with, and some misunderstanding. So can you?
Yeah, so in the base staffing model, and Shannon, correct me if I get any of this wrong at any point, but in the base staffing model, there are essentially at least two positions, teaching positions for exceptional ed, direct support and also pull-out support. So they're staffed at 1 to 30, which is much better than what we've been staffed at in terms of special ed. Now, those are kind of base level supports. What we do know is that when you go into IEP meetings, that there are going to be students that have other needs that will then be pushed in to schools based on, you know, the needs of the student. But the base model is just us saying, here's what we believe every school needs to serve kids well. But the other piece of it I want to go to is the supplemental. They're getting supplemental dollars not only for exceptional ed students, but also for E&L students. And those are going to be on top of what the supports will be needed, you know, through IDEA and other funding sources.
Okay, so just for clarification, prior to this staffing model, special ed wasn't built into the base staffing model, and with this staffing model it is. Is that correct?
I don't know that I would say it exactly like that. What we have done, what we are working through, and exceptional ed has probably had a harder time than anyone is, you know, on an HR standpoint, from a budgeting standpoint, is really cleaning up our position control to understand exactly where everybody is. This model is basically us showing a belief of we believe these are what the base support should be, recognizing that additional supports will come through IEPs and specific needs of kids.
And so any principal who isn't satisfied with their allocation around special education or looks at the kids in their building, they can then come back and advocate for their kids based on the number of service hours that are required to access.
Well, it's an IEP team decision.
Yeah.
It's not a principal's decision.
Right. Okay.
Shannon, what were you
Yeah,
doing?
I just want to make one clarification for the record. We're staffed at a 1-to-20 ratio, and that's okay.
That's what I said.
Just making it clear.
All right, Mrs. Thurman?
Since we're talking budget, one thing that we talked about, and I don't know how much of it you heard since you were on Zoom when we had our meeting with the commission, I want to just be sure that we have enough money in our maintenance. And I mean enough, not another $1 million or $2 million or $5 million. I mean, I think we need to have more like about $10 million in there to get us. That will never even get us caught up. But I mean, I just really sometimes feel sorry for Justin. I don't know if he's here or not. I don't want Justin to hear I feel sorry for him. But trying to do everything he has to do on the amount of money we give him to do it with, we're asking him to make bricks without straw, and that's not fair. So I just want to be sure when we see the budget that there's a lot more money in the maintenance account.
I don't know that it'll get to 10 million, but we're putting a priority on it. One thing that I don't know that's always been clear, but the capital maintenance team, which is about $1 million, has come out of that budget. So we are pulling that out of the budget, putting it in GP. So that's an additional $1 million. Our goal is to increase it as much as possible. I don't know that we can get it to 10 million.
Well, it's if this is one of our top priorities, we need to make it one of our top priorities. And that should be funded first. If you take care of the big things first, a lot of the little things take care of themselves. But anyway, just want to give you my input before you present us the budget. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Keene?
Yeah. So speaking on that also, what, out of that 25 extra million coming from TISA, how much of that is taken toward the maintenance?
So it's going to be about 45 million that's coming to us from TISA. But again, remember, some of that's coming with added requirements. So summer learning based on third grade literacy, tutoring, you know, obviously we'll have our normal increases in in custodial services, transportation, things like that. So that 45 million, when you add on, if we want to look at any raises, it starts dwindling down pretty quick. At minimum, our goal is to get the maintenance to 6 million, which would be a $4 million increase, about a 60% increase in what we've been doing in the past.
Okay, so if the county commission was in agreement to go back, so again, having conversations, if they were in agreement to go back to where if we offered to put in 10 million and they would match that 10 million, is that something that we'd be able to come up with?
We'd have to look at it. We'd have to definitely work through that.
Mr. Perez?
So we're scheduled for a budget work session, so I just want to point out that due to unexpected circumstances, we changed that. My thought is after these community meetings, we'll reschedule before you present the budget. And the idea, just for the board, is so that the input of the board is also taken into account before the presentation of the budget, so that we're not just working on a budget.
I would think
that
we
is
could have
what's-
a budget meeting
Yeah.
in between the second at the end of that last
Yeah,
meeting.
so I just want, the
Yeah.
the board to know, we don't intend to just look at a budget for the first time and have to make decisions based on it,
Yeah.
so.
Well, and actually piggybacking off that, when do you expect to have a full budget to us?
I don't know that I can predict that
Okay.
right off hand. I mean, we're again relying on federal dollars and estimates for title, and then coming from the state and local as well. So it's a little bit difficult. I think by end of March, we should have a pretty good estimate, but I can't give you a specific date.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of saying this for new board members. We do normally have a full budget by like March 1. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rhonda. We have the whole month to normally like kind of think through it, work through it, have work sessions. But I'm assuming like with the change.
Not March
No?
1, no.
Yeah.
What?
March 1? Like we normally have our
We
budget
have in
book.
the past.
Yeah, we have,
No, we
yeah.
always have. But
Yeah.
sometimes we haven't had till September.
Yeah.
There's been.
September. Not while I've been here.
Approved.
Yeah.
Approved.
But anywho, yeah, you normally have about 30 days. I don't know. I used to chair the finance committee, so you normally have about 30 days to review it. You know, ask a lot of questions, but this is definitely a different year, no doubt. So, do you expect though that like kind of all the work that we're doing this year, like putting into this budget model, I mean, that next year's process is going to just be more of a template? And okay.
Well, I think the board's always going to have to make decisions, and what you guys have pressed on the administration the last several years is to not just go with the same thing. I think it will be a much less detailed, I guess, because right now we're essentially having to, in some ways, start completely over.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I don't want the public to hear, and again, this is coming from y'all's press on us as administration the past several years, is to say we expect y'all to look at return on investments and make changes and you know do that. But yes, in terms of like position control will be much better. You know, just understanding the buckets and where they fit will be much easier. So it will, I believe, be a smoother process. You know, the staffing model, we had to make a decision. Do we go ahead and move forward with that, or do we hold off on it? And so thought it was the right decision to go ahead and move forward. So that's created a little bit more turbulence as well on top of it. So yeah, I think next year obviously will be a little bit smoother, but still want to make some strategic changes and decisions.
Mr. Keene.
So on a positive note, I met with all 7 of my schools, and 6 out of the 7 all had positive things to say. And even though they were losing positions overall with the supplemental, they were actually going to be gaining a couple positions from that. And it worked out to a couple of their good side of things. The number of retirements were just slightly less than the number of positions they were losing. So they only had to worry about 1 or 2 in one case where they were losing 7 positions, and another one where they were losing 6. They had people
I
retiring.
want to be clear. Like, again, this is where people are getting caught up. Like, we're trying to change the narrative of not thinking about just teacher to student ratios, but adult to student ratios, and then the supplemental dollars, the investment back into teachers. The number that I keep using is right now across the district, our student to teacher ratio is just over 18 to 1. If you just take the base and don't consider that anyone would invest supplemental into teachers, just with the base next year, the student to teacher ratio across the district would be 1 to just, I think, right at 22.5. That, looking down somewhere around there. And so even with just the base, we're still in a good place, but we know that schools, I mean, we've already had these conversations, schools are investing back into teachers. But the point is, again, we want schools to be able to make decisions for what their needs are, right? And so some schools may be willing to accept a higher student-teacher ratio if they can get additional support to, maybe address parent involvement, or maybe to address some behavior issues they're having. But part of the goal of this model is to provide that guided autonomy to schools to make decisions to better serve kids. 21 and a half. I'm off today.
Great. Are there any other questions?
I just want to say, I'm going to check with my principals again. Things have kind of changed a little bit. The more they get into it, the more they, in the beginning, after the first week, they were just, this looks pretty good. And then you kind of get down to the nuts and bolts. It changes a little bit.
Yep.
I'm going to check with all my principals again, and I'll give you an update.
Thank you.
That's great. So that's your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Mary Ellen, come back. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. You did a great job. That was just so short.
He did a state of the system
I know,
a
he
week
did
or two
great.
ago. Let him be.
We just don't have a lot to cover today, guys. So I got to fill airtime, Okay, so we'll do brief committee updates. Mr. Wingate is not here to give a policy committee update. If anybody, Faye, are you on the policy committee?
I attended.
You attended? Would you like to give us a brief update on what was discussed Monday? I think a number of us were absent.
Really, it was the second and final reading was discussed, and the use of the cell phone, as well as the dress code.
Okay, great. Were there any new policies that came up for review at the next committee meeting by
No.
chance? Okay, all right.
That cell phone policy we discussed that and agreed that a district-wide policy is needed. So what we committed to was getting some input on a policy from school administrators, teachers, with the idea of bringing back a first read to you guys in March,
Okay.
and hopefully looking at approval in April.
Great.
Did you-
Go ahead.
Did you get a chance to share that with the assistants and the principals?
I didn't,
Yesterday.
because at the end of the meeting, if you remember, after reading that policy, there was a lot of stuff in it that was like pulled from here and there. I wanted to take it, and so what we're doing right now is putting together like a draft of a district policy, and then we'll send that to principals and get their input.
For the people who were not here at the policy meeting, Larry gave us all policies from all over the state of Tennessee. I don't know if everyone got those or not, but that's very helpful to kind of read over and look at, so we can kind of see what we want in our policy.
Oh, that's great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Mrs. Jones, will you give us a facilities committee update?
So we have not met, but after the meeting, after our vote tonight, we will, looking at dates at the last week of February, like the week of the 27th. Well, I guess the last 2 days of February, and the first week of March. So somewhere in that week, we'll be scheduling a meeting for that date. I'll send a doodle poll out to the, committee tonight, to get a vote, because I try to get a consensus where the most of us can be at a meeting. And that meeting will be here, though.
Great. All right, and Mr. Perez, will you please give us a finance committee update?
There's going to be these community budget meetings that I want everybody to be present on, and somewhere in between of those, we're going to have a finance committee meeting for the board to be able to discuss, kind of give input on your priorities as we look at 2023.
Great. Okay. And Mrs. Black, do you want to give a behavior committee update? Don't know if there's
We
been
haven't
much.
met since the last
Okay.
board meeting,
Okay.
but we're going to be scheduling. I was hoping to get through budget season since it's not as pressing.
Okay. Great. Okay. Yes, Mr. Sharp or Dr. Sharp.
In response to Carissa's comments about the facilities committee, I'm currently working with a team of district staff to bring or put together an updated set of recommendations or possibilities for next steps with facilities work in the district. So we'll try to have that ready for you, or at least a beginning draft of that work ready for you in a couple of weeks. Set that meeting.
I think they want recommendations in the non-meeting.
And if you have ideas or recommendations, send those to me, and we'll make sure that we consider those for the proposals and plans.
All right, well, thank you for the committee updates, and thank you to the committee chairs. I think each committee is doing some important work. So really, for the first time since we've reformatted our meetings, we actually have enough time to do an overview or a kind of deep dive into our meeting agenda. So we can go through the agenda and talk about any items that you'd like to bring up for discussion, with the intention that then in our 6 o'clock meeting, we'll be able to breeze through with votes, or just going through and voting. So we'll start the meeting with roll call, of course, and then we'll have the approval of the agenda. We do have 3 items on the agenda that have been amended. The first is under consent agenda F1E, Board Policy 2.806. There's been an amendment to the language. Let's see, and the language should be in the second paragraph. It says the Board of Education recognizes responsibility to account for public funds and additionally recognizes responsibility of state law to secure 3 competitive bids on purchases of $25,000 or less. That $25,000 or less should have been removed, and it should have read on purchases of less than $50,000. So that's our first changed item. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that?
Which item, which number was the number?
It's item F1E, Board Policy 2.806, bids and quotations. I'll give you guys a few moments to look at that, and then if you have questions or comments, just speak into your mic.
For the record,
Yes.
on the first read, that
Yes.
was changed.
Okay,
It was just inadvertently
okay. Just a
left out.
wrong.
Yeah, on the
Okay.
second,
On the
second
second
read,
read.
so
Okay.
now it matches the first.
Okay, perfect.
What's the question?
So where, yep, so line 16 on purchases of 25,000 or less, the 25,000 or should have been omitted, and it should have read on purchases of less than 50,000.
17.
Okay. Okay.
I
Yes.
think that you need to clarify why we're changing this, or because of changing state
Yeah,
law.
State guidelines have changed to move it up to 50, and the question came up at the policy meeting, are we in line with the county and the state on that? The state has updated, the county has not updated it yet, but I would think that at some point they will.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions on that item? No? Okay, I do want to go ahead and point out the additional amendments to the agenda. Under board matters, we have differentiated compensation request, item B. And so you should have a document attached that gives you an overview of what's being changed. Dr. Brown, would you like to talk to us more about that, since we haven't had any time to ask questions?
Since our last meeting, we discussed the differentiated compensation about communication and teachers, our valued teachers losing their diff comp in January. And so after reviewing and having discussions with our team, as we're thinking about moving forward for 23-24, if this board decides to approve the differentiated compensation, how can we better communicate with our employees to make sure they fully understand the LOE, the requirements from the state, as well as just our high expectation as a employee, right? As a staff member, a professional, and a sense of attendance. We recognize that there was some, I don't want to say miscommunication, but there's some things that we could have done better to make sure that our staff understands the expectations going forward, and so everyone can plan. And so our recommendation is that we take this year, reinstate our employees that lost their differentiated compensation. We'll allow them to retro that back for this school year, but a commitment from the talent office is that we will over-communicate in the coming months and expectations going forward if the board elects to reinstate or to continue differentiated compensation for 23-24. There are some things we'll put in place where when it's all said and done, that our employees will actually sign, I don't want to say a contract, but a letter that states their expectations going forward, how they can lose their diff comp. All those expectations, we've yet to iron it out because we're going to continue to seek input from our principals, our teachers, to make sure that we present you a full plan of, number one, the cost, but also the expectations. So again, our recommendation from the memo is that we reinstate on 2 accounts, the LOE as well as the attendance. So estimating that's going to affect about anywhere, we're still scrubbing, if you elect us to go forward, anywhere from 160 to 180 employees.
Mr. Perez, you might as well stay. You should
Yeah,
stay.
so affect positively 180 employees. I take it from the hand clapping, right?
Yes, very positive, that's right.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Yeah, again, I hope from our team, and I actually had received some comments from a teacher in particular who said she reached out to HR and was very positive about her experience in talking to you all. So again, I think one of our goals is that, it's not an us versus them. We're not trying to, but we're actually trying to work together. At the same time, I hope the commitment, I trust the commitment goes both ways, right? As we're doing this and moving forward, differentiated pay has a purpose, right? It has a goal. It has outcomes and expectations. And so as you investigate and learn, try to do that. It is important that we understand. It's not like every time somebody comes, the complaints were merited. We reviewed them, we understood them. But if they're not, they're not. And if the expectations are there and people sign up for those expectations, understanding them fully, we'll need to go forward. So thank you for that work. That's not easy work. It's also not easy to stand up in a public forum and say, we recognize we could have done things better and communicated better. And then hopefully, as I said last time, we want to see outcomes actually reflect this initiative that we have. So, so thank you.
Great. Mrs. Robinson?
I do appreciate your reconsideration because Mr. Perez said, the concerns that I heard seem to be valid, but are we going to put any different stipulations in the agreement?
Yeah, I think that, our goal is we want to, diff comp, there's a lot of responsibility, right? And at the end of the day, we want to make sure we have high quality teachers in front of all of our kids. But there is a cost. We want a return on investment. So there are clearly going to be some clear guidelines, high expectations, right? We know that there's no substitute for a teacher, so we need teachers to be in school. But we also know that, part of the memo is our commitment to work with our principals to make sure that they're setting their teachers up for success, meaning there's a lot that goes on, and when it comes to LOE, what you have to select. So some of it is education, but clearly there's guardrails, right? And there's going to be expectations for our staff to meet in order to receive the additional funds.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Did you want to talk? Yeah. Mrs. Jones?
Well, Zach, I'm not going to tell you thank you because, I told you last time. I just thought so you do. And I'm just playing. I do thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I'm going to say that piece. Because like I said before, I did not think that was the right thing to do for our staff. And Dr. Robertson could tell you probably like a week later, I probably talked to 10 staff uninvitedly in various settings that were telling me they were leaving Hamilton County schools. So I'm very glad that this is not probably going to be the case anymore because their differentiated pay is coming back. But I would like to say, is there like a timeline for when this communication will begin to go out so that the staff will know when to anticipate receiving communication, we will know when they're receiving communication, and just to please make sure that we're provided with that information as well, so that if we do get concerns, we do get calls or whatever, we can say, oh, well, based on this decision tree or based on whatever, this is what, a means of a full circle of communication.
Yes, ma'am, and I'm sure that's going to coincide with the budget talks, but clearly we want to make sure we're going to go overboard, right? Number one, it's the right thing to do, but we know that in the world we live in, there's going to come a time if diff comp is approved in January, there might be some folks that lose it, right? And so, but I want to make sure that I'm standing before you that we did everything we possibly could to assure that our staff members understood the expectations, and but we want to help them meet that as well, to make sure we're doing what's right for our students.
Ms. Jones, you're talking about communication of like like
The
back pay on
communication.
this.
Yeah, just like everything, so that there's no gray, I don't like gray areas for
Yeah,
real. So like, especially when it comes to pay, like people just need to know,
Yes, ma'am.
is there a timeline for when they should expect this?
And we'll work with that communication. I guess what I want to be careful, because oftentimes when we put things out too early, it's pending board approval, and sometimes that gets confusing, right? Because if I send out things too early, staff member thinks it's a done deal. If this board elects to do something different, and then that's a miscommunication, right? So, but I will say that we'll be ready once this board say that, we want to continue diff comp, that it'll be spelled out, expectations, clearly what it looks like for them going forward, on our website, videos, having communications with all the different learning communities. I just want to be careful on how we don't want to inform too early where we're sending the message that it's already been approved, right? And so I'll work with Dr. Robertson to get a timeline.
I think what I hear you asking, and maybe I'm not hearing it right, is if they approve this tonight.
Yeah, because I might move for it tonight.
Yes, ma'am. I apologize. I thought I was.
So you should
I
have
hate
been
to
ready.
assume that you're going to approve tonight.
No,
I was
you
really thinking
should've
about
assumed.
23, 24 because I'm an advocate for diff comp. But yes, ma'am, we are ready to move on this. Right now, our team from the talent office, that's why I gave you an estimate of numbers, because we want to make sure that the staff member that lost their diff comp, they'll receive a letter, they'll get contact from HR personally to make sure that the retro, because it's going to take a little time to get retro, right? When you think about our payroll. But clearly, the commitment from our team is that all the teachers been reinstated, the 180, so will receive communications, email, letter with the expecting date when they receive their the funds.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Apologize for that.
Mrs. Thurman?
Just want you to know that you did communicate very well with a lot of people, because some people did contact me and say, Ms. Thurman, we really knew. We fully understood what the deal was. So I don't know where the miscommunication came from, but you can't beat yourself up too bad, because a lot of people got it and understood. So, but I'm glad that you're clarifying it for the ones that were confused for whatever reason. So I'm glad. So from henceforth, there will be no excuses, but I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Mrs. Black?
Dr. Brown, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for bringing this before the board. I appreciate the opportunity to reinstate this pay. I think it's very important moving forward when you're re-examining whatever you're going to put forth as far as requirements for differentiated pay. I would just like to request that you keep in mind that our teachers are people too. And a lot of our teachers are primary caregivers for people in their family, and it's not just themselves being sick, it's staying home with loved ones who have to have a caregiver at home when they're sick, children, parents, whatever the case may be, and coming to some sort of reasonable expectation. 100% attendance is not always reasonable for every teacher in Hamilton County. Getting a gold star is not always possible when you don't have someone else at home who's helping you. A lot of our teachers are primary caregivers and stay home with sick kids too as well. So just basing it around a little bit of recognition that a lot of our teachers are primary caregivers, and examining the LOE scores based on their own performance and individual performance instead of school-wide. I don't think anybody should lose pay based on the performance of their school if they've met their own personal goals. That seems like a justice, so just when you're examining those things, that would be my input.
I think we've got to have
Thank
a real, and I think these are hard conversations when we talk about the 45 million that that we're getting from TISA. Differentiated comp has not been funded in our GP budget. It's been funded through ESSER, right? And it's about
7.5 million.
About 7.5 million a year. And so I hear these, and these are popular things to say, but we have got, the intent is to make sure we've got great teachers in these schools that historically we have not been able to attract great teachers. So we need to be prepared to have a really hard conversation about differentiated compensation.
Can you look at the box? Oh, okay.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Mr. Keene?
So before the differentiated pay and going back, it was always, when it was, even before the zones were set up, teachers at Howard, teachers at Brainerd, teachers at a few of those, there's been bonus pay for certain schools for as long as I can remember. Didn't that come out of the regular budget also? No?
Yeah, there were several iterations. I think the one that you're talking about is like, it depends on the federal, the federal grants we did for a while, TIF, and all that is really just, once a year. It's for this. It's always pending in the school year, right? And so the money comes, money goes, and then of course we've been able to. This version is really, when you think about percentages and what we're able to give our teachers, it matters, right? And so this is a larger amount than we've ever used or given. Allowed our teachers to receive,
and more schools involved.
Yeah, 100% with Hope and Promise schools. Typically, it's always been our majority just the priority schools, which would be the Promise.
Priority. That was what I was trying to come up with. Getting old. Thank you.
Mr. Perez?
So to your comment, Dr. Robertson, because, and again, I know we still have one more year, and then we have to evaluate, but the idea of TISA with different added compensation per student that follows the student to that, I would imagine when we have to address that, kind of their goal is different schools with different needs should receive additional funding. Would that not be able to help substitute the differentiated pay?
Yeah, it absolutely can, but again, like everybody across the community, I was in a meeting today and someone brought up the 45 million, and it's like, it seems like a huge amount of money, but then when you just say differentiated comp, if we keep it exactly as it is, that's almost 8 million of it right there, right? And so at some point, like, we're gonna have to make decisions about what we fund and what we don't fund. The point of TISA is exactly right, and also putting more into the staffing formula and sending more to support kids that have needs across the county, not just in bands, but the school's got one kid that's living in poverty. They're getting money for that kid, right? And that's the point of TISA. It's what we really value and what we believe in. And so we'll continue to make those decisions, but they're gonna have to be some hard decisions.
But your
We're not
point's
gonna
well
be able to do
taken. There's hard
everything.
decisions. This isn't, and that was my feeling, even as we're looking at this, is we're talking about next year. But the truth, it's not that we're holding this over people. It's just the reality is that specific source of funding will no longer be there after this year, and we will have to understand where or how we can support in this kind of way. So it's always hard to make that. And we knew that when we were making ESSER decisions, because we said that, right? We said some of this we've got to understand will go after ESSER. And so I'm not saying this is going to go. I'm just saying that's the challenge for us there. But TISA, to my understanding, is kind of trying to address some of that by saying, here's extra compensation for that school.
Could I add one thing, Mr. Perez? I want to remind everyone that, when you think about differentiated compensation, that it's part of it, right? But we have other things that we're funding, and I don't want to leave that out because I know that teachers are listening. But you remember, we have stipends for, national board certification teachers, all of our lead mentors, support mentors, our stipends. So all of that is part of the package that we're just discussing, add-on salary for Promise and Hope. But there's a lot of additional things that we fund because we recognize our teachers and our staff's time that we need to continue to support.
And we wish everybody could get it. That's a reality.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Appreciate all the time and work that you and your team are putting into this. This is certainly this was a hard topic for the board and for you guys to tackle, so really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next item that has changed on the agenda is board matters, item C, the superintendent annual evaluation. I noticed that there's a note, like a memo for this, but there's not an actual copy of the evaluation tool. Can we email that out?
Yeah.
That would be good. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Bennett.
That's my fault. I really said clean it up, get the two of you to be sure we're okay with the final language, and I'll get it out as soon as you two are okay.
Okay,
Why don't you
well,
have one
we're,
job?
we're asking the
That's
board.
what I'm saying, Bennett. Like, what?
Yeah.
We pay you all
That's
this,
right.
you
That's
pay
right,
your
Ms. Tillman.
kids.
I have only one job.
Well, I mean,
For
how
30,000 boys, but.
well, the only concern I have is that we're asking the board to vote on it, and no.
It's not a voting item.
It's
Okay,
not
okay,
voting.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
I'm
so,
sorry.
so
Never
for
mind.
clarification,
Okay,
to
great.
catch the rest of the board up, so, the chair and the director and I have been working on the contract, his evaluation with specific targets, so the board can measure his performance. We've arrived at some agreed upon targets, and so really all that's left is I need to put it in lawyerly language. It really shouldn't take that much time, truth be told, but I should be able to get it out, I would hope. I'll try to get out by close of business Saturday.
What do you doing tomorrow? I'm just kidding.
Probably working on it.
Hey, you
I'm
work
joking
on
with you.
Saturday?
I mean, don't we have a template from last year's? Okay, Scott.
So-
When's it
No,
gonna,
I'll
when's
get
it
it
gonna
out
be due back in?
I'll get it out Saturday.
Okay,
You
thank
get it
you
out
so
Saturday.
much.
How long will we have to work on this? Is it
Yeah.
gonna be like a week or something? I mean, is there a time
I
we
mean,
have to do it in?
Weren't we talking, because a lot of the metrics are based on new strategic.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So actually, no evaluation has to be done until August. We had to
Approve
build
the
a,
targets.
remember previously, well, of course, we had an instrument that we actually used to do the evaluation. According to his contract, we were supposed to have had that in place by now. We didn't have it. So this is putting it in place for us to use in August for his evaluation.
Right, and one of the things that we had talked about even as early as the TSBA retreat was that, given that the strategic plan was gonna change a bit, there were some thoughts that we needed to be sure that the goals that we were going to put into his contract were aligned to the new plan. It made very little sense to set some goals based upon the previous plan when very early in 2023, you were going to have a new plan. So there was some delay that was intentional. Somehow between January and February, that got lost in my inbox, and that's my fault. But there's no reason that we can't, when you talk about the plan, you can't tip your hat to, here are some things that we're going to put into the performance goals, because that's a natural time to discuss them anyway. Golly. Oh, okay, so we have some board members who remember this. So Ms. Robinson will remember this, and Ms. Thurman will remember this. One of the things that the board did when it hired Dr. Johnson was the hire was simultaneous with I'm sorry, Ms. Jones too.
She's like our veteran, our new veteran.
Well, as y'all will remember, that we moved away from the TSBA model of, is he a stylish dresser? Does he communicate well?
Spiffy.
Yeah.
Spiffy dresser.
Things that don't really measure the performance of the job.
Right.
And so, question? Yeah, see, it was seriously on the evaluation format. And so this board moved in the direction of having a performance-based evaluation.
Can we bring back the dress question?
Well, he dresses get focused.
Tied to is he moving the district forward on metrics that this board is held accountable by? And so what that meant was we actually had to put some thought into having metrics that were within his control and that were consistent with the district moving forward. Because you think about it, if you could easily jump up your graduation rate if you're not holding students accountable, right? So that's one way you could manipulate one number, but that's contrary to what the district wants to do. So over the years, we put a lot of thought into what these metrics look like. It's largely the same stuff we've looked at before, but the targets are things that the administration has proposed. And I guess when you review your plan, it would be good to say, here's some things we're going to be held accountable by.
Mr. Perez?
So only for clarification, but when you say I'm working with the director, I, in my professional experience, have never had somebody come and work with me on the tool prior that will evaluate me in that kind of way. So, so I just want to clarify, it's not that you're writing, hey, here's where I'm going to be evaluated, it's that we're looking at these metrics and trying to determine of this, what can we really hold the director and his team accountable to achieve.
Correct.
So, yeah, it's just that statement rings like, wait a minute.
Absolutely. To start the process, Scott and I sat down and we started building the tool, and then we said, all right, Dr. Robertson, we want to hit goals that align with your strategic plan, so insert goals that align with your strategic plan. So, okay, any more comments or questions on that? Okay, great. Okay, we'll go back to the front of the page. So we've approved the agenda. We have our pledge to the flag and meditation by by Lori Collier, principal of Calvin Donaldson. We'll have our exemplars of excellence. And then we'll, of course, have our board disclaimer statement. And then we'll go through our consent agenda. Moving into field trips. Does anybody have any field trips that they wanted to pull from the agenda to discuss? Item 7C. 1? No? Okay. And then we have an update, or we have, under Chief Financial Officer, we have bids and contracts. Is there anything under bids and contracts to pull or discuss? Okay, go ahead.
I'm obviously new here. A lot of the discussions around the school buses and meeting the needs of the district have been fraught, I guess. I've heard a lot from my community and a lot of complaints about the current services that we're receiving. And I'm concerned that we didn't really have a whole lot of options around our bus contract, that we don't have really the option to pick a different a different provider for our bus services, considering that there have just been a lot of problems. But I don't really have anything to compare it to because I've never been sitting in this seat during a school year before, so I don't know if the level of performance or the bus routes that have been missed, or like buses being too crowded that kids are sitting like 4 on a seat to get to school. I don't know if that's typical or has been typical, or if there's any way that we can build any sort of accountability measures into our bus contract. I just know that I've had a lot of concerns.
I'll ask Brandon Allen to come up. I think I saw him back there. Before what Brandon addressed some of this, couple of things. Number one, this is the second time we've gone through an RFP process since 2017, and we've had approximately 3 vendors bid through both processes. Our system is so large that there are very few vendors that are willing or that have the capacity to take on. Right now there's a national shortage in bus drivers. We have been strategic in increasing the number of contracted drivers. We've doubled the number of contracted drivers, taking away some of the contracted services that First Student provides. There are always going to be things that we can do better. What our number one priority and what First Student has done a tremendous job of is safety. We're one of the leaders in the Southeast region in terms of safety numbers. So that's our number one priority. The bus driver shortage is something that, regardless of who we went with, and it probably would have been even more difficult if we brought in a new vendor, but we certainly will continue to push that. Brandon, will you talk about some of the liquidated damages that are in the contract?
Yes, sir. We, good afternoon, by the way. Good evening. We put in liquidated damages in the contract, so therefore if First Student is unable to have enough drivers to cover a particular route, they will be fined the whole amount of the route. And what we will do is have a contractor use that money to pay a contractor to cover it. I want to be very clear on this. When we do charge them liquidated damages and we put on there that a route is not covered, that does not mean we are not running a route. We have yet, and I think Joe Wingate and I spoke of this in the last board meeting, we have yet to cancel transportation for any school, any route. We have 246 daily routes. First Student runs some, and then the contractors, I've got 102 contracted routes. that are ran by independent contractors. When I came on board as the compliance manager 4 years ago, we had 68. We have 102 today. We have taken that many routes from First Student because they couldn't cover them. It's not that we're working against First Student. We work with them very closely daily, but it is in the contract for liquidated damages. If they can't cover a route, we will pull the money from them for that particular day or that particular route. And I'll go ahead and I want to speak on the driver shortage as well. Like Dr. Robertson said, I mean, that's everywhere. Bradley County, that's everywhere. Even on the contractor side, we're a little short sometimes. We, again, get all the routes covered, but no matter who the company guys we bring in, we still have the same pool of drivers here in Hamilton County. Most of the drivers that drove for Durham, they're driving for First Student. Some drive for our contractors. Again, no matter who we bring in here, we still only have the same pool of drivers in the county.
Mrs. Jones?
Brandon, with our contract drivers or owner operators, about how many of them pretty much host fleets?
I would say at least 8 to 12 currently. We have some contractors that have 9 routes. Actually, we have a couple contractors that have 9 and maybe 10 that they're covering. 9 are contracted.
Okay, so that means for the public that they may own a bus and drive a bus, but then they could have 8 other buses that
Yes, ma'am.
you, myself, Dr. Robertson, Tiffany, Rhonda could drive, right?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay. So, and you and I talked about this, so I'm
Yes,
just gonna go on this for public record.
Yes, ma'am.
Brandon and I talked about my concerns because I wanted to see what the other offers were, and talk to them. We talked about that. I understand time. It is what it is today, or at this point for this school year. But I did express to Brandon my concerns that I feel like the same process that Durham would go through, First Student would go through, Zoom, Carter, whoever, Greyhound, that if you're an owner-operator and you have a fleet of buses, you're a company. You're not just somebody that owns 8 buses. That's a small business. And to me, those individuals should present to us the same way.
Through an RFP.
Right. That's just how, I mean, if you just own one bus and you drive a bus and that's it, that's different. You're one bus driver. But if you own a fleet of buses and you can contract services for field trips, for Girl Scouts, for churches, for senior citizens trips, you're a company. And I think that they should have to do the same thing. And so I did express that to Brandon, and I don't know if he's shared that with Justin and Robert or not, but that is a concern for me, and I would like to see that going forward. So I know their situation doesn't come up at the same time that we do this, but whenever that comes up, I think that process should be the same, or we should look at that. I don't know if that's a procurement issue, or I don't know who we need to talk to about that, but I just really I'm struggling with a company has to do this.
And actually, are contract drivers on 1-year contracts, or are they also on 4-year contracts? They are? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I just wanted to share that, just going forth. I mean, I really think we need to strongly consider that.
Yes, ma'am.
Question?
Sure, Mr. Actually, let me get Mrs. Robinson. Mrs. Robinson?
Well, this is more or less a follow-up of Ms. Black's comment about seating capacity per bus.
Yes, ma'am. We get complaints that there's over 84 students on buses. When we pull the video and actually go out to the school, that is not the case. What we do see is sometimes there's 3 students in a seat, but the other seats are full of band instruments. The students refuse to move some of the instruments. So we have got with our bus drivers, put out communication to them, say, hey, before you pull off at the school, make sure the seats are clear for students. Band instruments need to sit in the lab. They need to go in the lab. And that's something that the Highway Patrol, we work with them as well, because we're in the business of transporting students, not instruments. So if they are allowed on the bus, but they need to keep them in their seats. So that's where a lot of those complaints come from when they call my office. They will say, hey, there's 3 or 4 people sitting in a seat. There's not room for 4. I'll be honest with you, there's no way. We barely can fit 3 in there sometimes. And then when we do pull the video, because we do have video on every county bus now, and when we pull the video, that's what we see.
Thank you. That's just one of many criterias.
And just to touch a little more on that, all of our buses are 84 passenger. Do we put 84 on there? No. We try to keep that low, but per state law, they are 84 passenger.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Also, more for elementary, you have
Yes.
3 elementary and
Yes,
2
Ms.
high school,
Thurman.
middle
Yes.
school usually, so.
Absolutely.
It gets to be
For
different.
high school, now, there's sometimes when kids go home with other kids on Fridays for the weekend, there's more students riding, but on our high school, I have the routing office look at it. When we get to 60 kids or 58 kids, we start looking at it for a high school or middle school. Elementary, you can maybe put 70 comfortably on there, but high school, middle school is a little different.
Mrs. Jones?
One last thing. I don't know if this is a first student situation or a Hamilton County situation. But like I said, you and I talk a lot.
Yes, ma'am.
Because communication sucks coming from transportation. It's gotten better, but it's
This
not.
year, it's gotten better?
Somewhat.
Okay.
You sound
It's a work in progress.
Okay, it is a work in progress.
But
yes,
I
ma'am.
say that because I know that Brandon and I talk a lot, and so I know that he's working on that. But my biggest concern is that we continue to improve upon that so that parents know where their kids are. And I know all this technology on these buses, I've heard all the flair about that, right? But so that parents know where their children are, and that if there's reasons why we have substitute drivers or someone else is driving the bus. I mean, I probably could get on Facebook right now and it's somebody on my timeline fussing because somebody picked up their kid and didn't go the way they normally supposed to go, or didn't, or the kid came home, or the kid called on the bus and said, "Mama, we went this way and not this way." And so for me, I struggle with that because on November 20th of 2016, somebody went the wrong way.
Yes, ma'am.
So I just think we really need to improve that piece of communication. And I don't know that's even if the bus is going to be late, if the bus is delayed. You know, we had that situation with CSLA where the kids weren't getting to their bus stops. I mean, right down the street to Food City on Highway 58 from CSLA, it was like 2 hours later. That's a lot.
That was one time, right? Just.
Yeah, but I mean, for the second day of
it
school
was.
with the kindergartner that she was waiting on, that was a lot for that mama. And for me, if that had been me,
Yes, ma'am. I understand. And we found that issue out. We found what that
Right.
was. We worked.
and so I just think we need to make sure that we're communicating that, because for her, she just kept telling me in the parking lot, if I just had known, because I called you right there.
Yes, ma'am.
So the thing was, had she known that, her angst would have been completely different.
So
And so I just want to make sure that we're communicating that. And I'm very passionate about this, but next year, I'll have a little boy
I
that's
want
going
to
that way.
circle this back
And
to budget of like, these are hard decisions. Brandon, sorry, Mr. Allen, you've said the number of contracted routes we've increased, technology we've put in.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, customer service is something we want to improve in. How many more employees do you have than you had 4 years ago?
At least 4.
I'm talking about to deal with
Oh.
calling parents and staying on top of
Over
this.
40.
But you don't have anybody additional
Correct.
that's going out, and so.
That's correct,
like,
sir.
Like, this is conversations we're having a budget. If we want customer service to improve, we've got to invest to help him do
Right.
a better job.
And I'm okay with that. So if that's something you need to present to us, but I just think we really need to work on that, because I care about every child in Hamilton County. I do.
Right.
And now that I am a mom, I see it from a different lens. I had a passion from one lens, but now that I am a mother, I see it from a completely different lens. And so it just really, if you know, it's a difference when you know. And I think we have to get that out. I don't know if it's a school thing, because I don't think it's always you all. I'm not saying that. You and I have
No,
talked about
and
that.
it's not, and I was gonna touch on that very
So,
quickly. The
I think it's just-
transportation department, when our drivers call in on the two-way radio, we've got communication on all of our buses now. That's something that we've not always had.
Right.
Drivers call in to dispatch, we notify the school. It is up to the principal at that time to put it out to the parents, whether they use, there's several platforms they can use. The Remind app, email, whatever that school, that principal chooses to use is how they get it out. Once my office gets it to the principal, again, it's up to the school to get it out to the
Right.
parents.
And so I want to just kind of
But
put that out there too.
Yes, ma'am, but we are working in that. I'm glad that you see that has been some change, because that's one of my top things. Ms. Thurman several years ago said I remember this from one of the board meetings, when people call transportation, no one answers. We put the hotline in place, 498-5555. That rings multiple buildings throughout the district for someone to answer. So that is something that I'm continuing to work on, and you should see more improvements on that moving forward.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Mr. Keene, did you say you had a
I
question?
just need to ask him a question.
Offline? Okay. Mrs. Black?
Is there anything, and I know this, a lot of this falls under your purview, but you're dealing with so many different service providers.
Yes, ma'am.
Like you have contracted bus drivers who are running several different routes. The consistency is an issue. I mean, my own son rides a bus. His stop time when I signed him up for the bus route, he's supposed to be dropped off at 4:19. He gets out of school at 4 o'clock. He's dropped off at an aftercare program. So I'm not there waiting, luckily, but that bus can be there anywhere from 4:30 to last week. I think it was 5:45 when he got dropped off when the aftercare program was closing.
Yes, ma'am.
He got off the bus and got in my husband's car to come home. And so can we improve some communication when we know that there's this variability, because not everybody can sit and wait for 30 minutes or an hour at their kid's bus stop.
We are sending stuff to the schools. Am I gonna say that we miss something sometimes with 246 buses running all over the county? Absolutely. Let me give you an example. We'll use East Hamilton, Westview, and East Brainerd Elementary. That's a route. We have multiple buses that go to East Hamilton Middle, go to East Hamilton High, go to Westview, and then East Brainerd. Okay, say the afternoon, we're driving the East Hamilton, Ottawa-Ringo Road at East Brainerd, horrible intersection. There's a crash there. They're gonna be late for the next 2 tiers. Okay, so if we make it to Westview, a student gets sick or something happens, mom is not at the stop to pick up a kindergarten student. We do not drop that student, take them back to school if we can't get mom on the phone. We're gonna be late to our magnet school. At that time, the drivers are radioing in, our dispatch office is calling those principals. The information is given to the principals as quickly as we know it. But remember, please keep in mind that we are on a 3-tier routing system, and we're transporting magnet students across the county. So that puts a toll on us. Can we do it? Absolutely. We do it every day. But keep in mind, anything with these little guys, with these kindergarten students, with the elementary students that happens on a 2nd tier, we may have to return them to school, and that kills us on our 3rd tier. Most of the time, we have other drivers that will swoop in. I'll call a contractor, hey, help first student out, go cover their 3rd tier so we're not late. That happens almost daily, weekly. But it is a logistical issue. I mean, by transporting all over the county, we love doing it. That's what we're here for, and we do it. But things happen and things come up. But communication is key. I understand that, and we will continue to work on that communication and get better.
So it sounds like that's an operations issue to the school, to the principals. I can give you several schools, Dr. Sharp, but the principal just need to call.
Mr. Perez?
So I think, back to that, I think for parents that are listening, the communication should be to the principal. If the principal hasn't heard from you, they should reach out to you. I want to protect, Marco Perez, one member of this board, do not believe that it's the board's job to be making sure to call receiving every call of a kid that's late or not showing up or whatever. Not that I don't want to hear from parents. I do want to hear from parents. But our job is to hold you accountable, but not to be dealing with it. So what I'm hearing from you is that you are trying to communicate as quickly as possible, as soon as you know, to the principals. If you as a parent, something's happening, your principal should have already been aware of the situation and should have made you aware of the situation. But if they haven't, that's where we hold principals accountable as well to the role that they're playing. And I hope all of them are learning to improve on that. And I got an email this day about a school up on Signal Mountain, first thing in the morning, right? Like we should be made aware by our team and our staff of what's going on.
Right, and I want to be very clear. We work with our principals very closely. I mean, daily. I had one call me right before I was walking into this meeting. We work with them very closely. They've got a lot on their plate. I get that. But we always can do better in communication, and that's in communicating.
But they
that's
also
what we
have
do.
team members, so if
Absolutely.
there's somebody who.
Absolutely.
Great. Any other comments on the bus contract? Thank you so much, Mr. Allen.
Yes, ma'am.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, I do want to point out that we have about 10 minutes so that we can take just a very brief break and then roll into our scheduled meetings. So we'll try to fly through the rest. Is there anything else under bids and contracts that anyone would like to discuss? No? Okay, then we have financial reports. Is there anything for financial reports? Okay. How about budget amendments? With federal grants, state grants, and self-funded programs? Okay. How about general operating amendments? Okay.
That'll be coming up for a vote.
Yes, it's on the consent agenda. Mhm. Yep.
I've shared.
Okay. Next, grant application request, Executive Director of Social Emotional Health. We have a mental health service professional demonstration grant program. Does anyone have any comments or questions about that item? Okay, great. All right, and then next we have Dr. Sharp's item, the TOSHA plan revision approval. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right. Do you want to speak to that, Dr. Robertson, just briefly? Because you pointed out to me that it's a unique
Tim
item.
Harper, Tim, if you don't mind coming up for a second. This is a update it every so often, and this is the first time we've had to do it in a while. It's basically just us complying with some requirements with TOSHA, but Tim is much more intelligent than I am about this.
This is a program the school system has had for 25 years. The Tennessee OSHA office emailed us and asked us for an update. Really, they're wanting us to update personnel. I mean, the old plan had Gary Waters, and had the position of Assistant Superintendent of Auxiliary Services, and we changed that to Dr. Sharp's position. They wanted an update of our buildings and locations and then number of employees in each location. That was really, there's no significant changes to the plan itself. So, any other questions?
Okay, if there's no questions about that, we'll move on. Thank you so much. Appreciate the overview. Okay, and then we move into board policies, second and final reading. Does anyone have any policy on the list that they'd like to ask questions about or to make comments about? Good deal. Okay, and then we move into administrative business matters. The approval of proposed high school and middle school zones for Brainerd High and East Ridge High, Brainerd High and Hickson High, and Delwood Middle and East Ridge Middle. Is there any conversation on the rezoning? And of course, the administrate.
Hold on one second.
Yes,
There
go
was
ahead.
question, just not necessarily about, and Dr. Sharp may have talked to you about this, but the question was about the students' transportation to their school if they're grandfathered in. And we tried to explain that to them, how that's normally not the case, so forth and so on. But some of the community felt like the students were being forced to attend their zone school because they weren't given the option of, if they elected to grandfather in their junior, senior year, whatever years they're in school, to remain there. So I just wanted to make sure that that is shared with you as the superintendent, that some of the community did feel that way.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Jones. Okay, are there any other comments on this topic? Okay, thank you. All right, next item, a request for a new position, JROTC additional instructor at East Hamilton High. Are there any comments or questions? Okay. The next, first reading of board policy 4.2121, charter school renewal. Are there any comments or questions on that item? And I see that Mrs. Kofeld is here if we do have questions or comments. Okay, great. All right, moving into board matters. We have the third grade joint resolution written by Ben Connor and Gary Keene. And I believe the resolution is in front of you. And that will need to be voted on, correct? Okay. Okay, is there any discussion about this item? Mrs. Thurman.
Yes, I know that I talked to Gary earlier and Sherry about this. I think there were some amendments coming to this. I will not be signing this, and the reason is not that I agree with everything about it, because I have talked to some teachers about this. I'm just glad that somebody is finally doing something about the reading in schools, that it is becoming front and center. Years ago, when I first got on the school board, I heard that we had people in high school who could barely read on the second grade level. I found it impossible to believe. So I had people stop by my shop and introduce me to their grandchildren. Mostly it was grandchildren. Maybe their grandchildren had come to live with them for whatever reason. And I found out that there were some people who could not read in high school. And it just absolutely blew me away. I think that one thing probably just, it just rocked me back on my heels. I thought, how does this happen? How do you get to be in high school and cannot read? And I know that I still hear teachers tell me, and another thing that bothers me, of course, I'm all about compensating teachers who do a really, really good job. But I'm also all about these teachers can't do a really, really good job because the kids are not where they need to be in order for them to teach them, especially like in middle school. If they get out of elementary school and are reading on a second or third grade reading level, and they're in middle school, and then we expect the middle schools to teachers to teach them, and they get very frustrated about this because then they're held accountable for their grades. And at one time I said that some of these kids in high school who could not read, we need to trace them back where they came from. Who did you have for a teacher in middle school? How did you get past middle school? Who did you have for an elementary school teacher? I wanted to do that, and the teachers union had a snit fit, I don't mind telling you. It seems that nobody wants to be accountable. Somebody is going to have to start being accountable, and I think this is probably one of the first ways to do that. I'm personally glad that the state is taking this on. Like I say, I don't know that this is the answer, but I think it's making us look a whole lot harder, because until children can read, nothing else matters. History doesn't matter. You can't do social studies. You can't do anything else until you can read. So this may not be perfect. Like I say, I know there's some resolutions out there. I know a lot of people are just given a lot of options in here, a lot of extra help. This is just something that needs to be addressed. And I'm glad, like I say, it's being addressed all across the state for a change from everyone. I still think it was a good idea. If we have a lot of kids that are not reading in high school, we need to find out what in the world's going on downstream, that we're getting kids in high school who can't read. So like I say, I won't be signing it for that reason. This is still a work in progress, and I want them to know that I'm glad that they're taking this on. They may have to change this around and move it around and make some amendments to it. But I personally am glad to see the state taking a stand and saying, we have to get our kids to read if we're going to advance these students where they need to be. So I won't be signing it.
All right, Mrs. Robinson?
I too am in favor, and in fact, the level of not reading is what prompted me to run for school board. I just couldn't believe that Hamilton County could not do a better job. And to me, it's cruel for kids to go forward and it be more difficult. And I feel confident that the Hamilton County School has put the level of descriptions in place. We've got exemptions for children who will not be retained. And I saw the first quarter numbers, and I'd like to know if the second quarter, the end of the test for February the 3rd, if that data has been compiled. From the first quarter ELA benchmark that I'm looking at, 19% were not proficient.
We can get the second quarter too.
And how are we teaching the children to read? Are we getting reading specialists?
Yeah, we've had, I mean, we call them instructional coaches that work with the literacy teachers. The past 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, we had assistant principals and principals going through PD around specifically reading instruction. We made a significant shift, and it was a bold move by the board, middle of the pandemic, to move forward with a purchase of, new, high quality literacy adoption. And so we've made significant changes and shifts in how we're addressing literacy. The tutoring piece, the summer programming piece is going to be a part of that. I will go back again and talk about, as we did last week, say the system, the community issue. One of the issues, we still have about the same number of kids that aren't on grade level in 3rd grade coming to us in kindergarten, not prepared for kindergarten. And so from a community standpoint, we've got to do a better job in the early learning spaces. We've got to make sure that we're identifying kids that have needs and providing interventions earlier. And so we're making shifts, and we'll continue to do that. But we can get the second quarter data to you tomorrow.
Because we shouldn't stop and say, think that the end is retaining them, because we're going to help them through the summer program and allow them to catch up. And then in the 4th grade, if they still aren't level, we're going to still help them. So I'm excited to see if it will work, because if it doesn't, we can adjust. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Keene?
All right. So as one of the sponsors of this resolution, I've got a little bit I'm going to read, and then I'm going to actually talk from experience of having to decide whether to retain kids in middle school at Hunter Middle School, whether to retain kids in an adult situation, whether to retain them at Central High School, at Red Bank Middle School, and then at Harrison Bay Future Ready Center, which, was the different schools that I was an administrator at. But first, our legislature is working hard to hold schools accountable. I will give them that. They're placing in our corner a law to retain students in the 3rd grade. It's also there, as I talked to one of our senators, it's there to also hold parents accountable for their child's education in the younger formative years. But in talking with teachers and parents in my district, and Mr. Connor in his district, they felt that this was not an appropriate law placed on children and families. We must now present this resolution because this week and next week, the legislature is meeting to address other possible amendments to this law that could make it tougher, could make it easier. We'll see how those things go. But right now there are 14 other amendments on this retaining law for 3rd grade that come up in the next few days. It may not change the law, and it probably won't, but we hope that it will change their ideas behind the placement of the law and the reason it was placed. I hope that we as a Board of Education for Hamilton County will look at what's best for our students and our parents and our teachers and show support with right now 21 other school systems in the state of Tennessee that have turned in these resolutions. So part of the resolution includes some specifics. And the one thing I will just say, just to cut it down and briefly, they're saying retain a student because of a poor score on one indicator. Best practices in education, as I've been through there 39 years, that's as bad as you can do. You cannot base a child's retention on one indicator, one test. And yes, they can't take that test a second time in summer school. Retention is something that's looked at by talking to the parents, talking to the teachers, talking to the students, looking at attendance, looking at homework habits, looking at behavior habits, looking at possibly inclusion, dyslexia, 504. All these things come into play, and yes, there are a few safeguards, Ms. Robinson, that they've put in there with regards to certain identified groups. But the average student is being graded and decided on retention, not even graded. If I want to retain a high school student, he has to have a failing grade. This third grade student may have a passing grade but have failed that third grade TCAP test and will be retained even if his grade is passing. That is not correct. That should not happen. And that is why we are presenting this resolution to ask the legislature to reevaluate the law the way it's written and to look at other indicators besides the one TCAP test that they are saying is so important, which I, as an administrator, as a teacher, as a school board member, I disagree. I don't think we should have benchmarks. I don't think we should have a TCAP test. I think that, you know, there are other things out there, Read 360 and some other proven different assessments that we use that are better than TCAP. So, and I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keene. Mrs. Jones?
So I am not in support of the third grade retention law. I have not been from the beginning because I just really struggle with legislators with no educational background creating a law and asking professionals with education and degrees to execute it in fidelity, but they didn't have a say in it. That really concerns me. And I'm not saying that they should be the ones writing the law, but I think when they were lobbied to be, when they lobbied and asked to be a part of the conversation, that should have been respected. I also think that it's just a very tough job for the State Department of Education to figure out the best way to execute this when they know a lot of what Mr. King said and a lot of what other teachers have said to me, that it's difficult to do when you know professionally you're compromising things that you believe in morally, ethically wise for your profession. So I really struggle with that. I understand the level of accountability. I get that. No, we don't want someone 17 years old in the 11th grade that can't read. No, we don't want that either, right? We don't want that to happen. But I think there's a lot of variables and factors that need to be considered and looked at before the state just says, hey, do this. I also think that if the state proposes legislation or passes, let me say, now they have passed legislation, that they should, and it's a mandate, that you should fund it, fully fund it. And so I struggle with that with anything. So I struggle with that with the BEP. I'm very cautious about TISA because until I see the full check or the amount to fund it, I just really am very hesitant to that, because if that's what they want to put in the local lab. They want you to fund it, but they don't want you to have a say in what happens to the retention of your students. And so I really struggle with that, because our state legislature will say, and across the state, so not just our local Hamilton County delegation, but across the state, the delegations are saying, well, the state is giving money for high dosage tutorials. And yes, they are. They dropped a little bit of money down in every county for high dosage tutorial services. I think if you talk to Brecken, she'd tell you that that's not going to even, you can't, you know how to, in the summertime you get them little flowers and you blow and the little stuff fall off. That's not going to even touch. That's how you're going to blow on one flower and think it's going to touch 44,000 children. It's not. That's how much the value of that money is going to do for the amount of children that we have behind on literacy and numeracy levels. And when we asked our delegation, local and afar in the state of Tennessee, because I've been in a couple of different states where we've been able to ask various regional delegations, how is this going to be funded? Is this going to be fully funded? Their answer, do you know what their answer is, Faye? Rhonda and anybody else on this board, y'all know what their answers are? Well, we're hoping that local philanthropy and local partners will help us fund this. So what you're saying is you want to give local responsibility to pay, but you don't want to give local responsibility or local voice to the law or to enacting a mandate. And so I really struggle with that until we can get that right, until they can get that right. I just don't know if I could say I fully support this law. I don't, once again, want kids behind reading. I do not want that. But I don't want it to be based on a TCAP score, because I was the kid in 3rd grade and 4th grade and 5th grade at Arts and Sciences chewing up a whole 5-pack of Bubblicious bubblegum every day when we was watching Hey Do So help ease test anxiety so I could take a test. I was also the kid when I got ready to go to college that had a 3.8 GPA, but I had test anxiety, so I never surpassed an 18 on the ACT. I was also the kid in college that graduated magna cum laude, or was getting ready to, and took the GRE and cried all the way back because I didn't get the score that I needed to get into the University of Memphis. So it wasn't that I couldn't read, it wasn't that I wasn't smart, it wasn't that I didn't know how to obtain the knowledge that was given to me, I just didn't test well. And so I think it's hard to say that this one test dictates a child's success. And it's hard to say that this one test implicates what a teacher can do with a kid. But it also means that it wasn't rocket science to go back to teaching kids how to read, how my aunt, when she taught for 40 years at Chattanooga Public Schools, basics, sounds to letters, letters to words, words to sentences. That's just common sense. That's how you teach see Dick, run, see Jane, catch the dog. That's basic stuff. S-C-E. Like all of that is basic reading. So it's not rocket science. It's kind of like we're reverting back to how we were taught to read. And it's like, oh, we're doing this grand thing. No, and Rhonda talks about this all the time, basic reading. But it's just basic reading. Stuff that our grandparents did with us, stuff that grandparents and parents can do today in the home with their children. But you have to teach them those things, phonetics. But I just think to say that one test is going to dictate a child's ability to read on 3rd grade level because it sounds really good for somebody to feel good about themselves and create a law, I just cannot support that.
Thank you, Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Thurman.
Yes. Well, I guess I was just sitting here thinking it's a shame that the state had to do this to hold our feet to the fire. We should have been doing this, or to hold our feet to the fire, that we should have been doing this all along, some form of this, maybe not this, and I would agree with Gary, one test, but I would think that this is one thing you could pick up the phone. See, I don't like doing resolutions. I just pick up the phone and call the state reps. I have their number by my computer at home, and I have it, and I'm not afraid to use it. So I call them, and I told them, matter of fact, I talked to a couple of them this past week, and then you just tell them these things, and no more than I like them sending messages to us about what they think we need to do. But anyway, also, you talk about kids not being ready for kindergarten. I remember we started kindergarten because kids weren't ready for the 1st grade. Where does it end? And then there brings on the talk of pre-K, but yet there's so many teachers tell me that some of these kids we're trying to teach them to read too early, and they're not developmentally ready to learn, and they get real frustrated trying to learn because we're trying to put more on them than they really can do. To teach a pre-K to read, some of them can, but to try to push them to do that is just a very much a frustrating thing. And remember, kids now are going to school 1 extra year than I ever went because they're going to kindergarten. They're in school now 13 years instead of 12. Well, some of you did. Some of you younger guys did. Us old folks didn't. Okay. I started kindergarten. I started 1st grade when I was 5. But teachers will tell you, my friends who I have talked to on the phone many times and talked to over the past few years, said before we had kindergarten, that they could not tell the difference in a child who had been in kindergarten and the children that just started in 1st grade by Christmas of the 1st grade year, because they were all about developmentally ready to all learn to read about in the 1st grade. So, and then too, there's been all kinds of articles about rethinking pre-K. Is it really necessary? Or are we pushing the kids too hard? Are they getting frustrated? Or whatever? But I think Vanderbilt even did one about rethinking pre-K, that's just not the way to go either. So when we say kids show up at kindergarten not ready to learn, well, that's where they're learning to be 1st graders. So I don't really know what the point is of that. We've always been able to teach kids to read. My point is, we used to teach kids to read in the 1st grade. And now, because now we're going to teaching them to read in kindergarten, and now we're saying when they're not ready for kindergarten. I've always said, are we just going to wait till they're born and, like Johnny Bench, catch them as they come out of the womb and whisk them off to some school so they'll be Einsteins or something? I don't know what we think. But we're going to have to just get our act together. And like I say, it's a shame that the state is doing this, is having to do this, and we haven't really drill down and making this an absolute top priority to begin with. And I agree with Gary on some points, and I'm hoping that the state legislators, with some of the revisions to this and some of the amendments to this, are going to fix this. But not doing anything is not an answer. It's just not acceptable anymore. Something has to be done, and I'm personally glad the state representatives have taken the initiative to put this out there and say we're looking at it. And when we ask them for millions and millions and millions of dollars, we're making decisions up here, and a lot of us are not educators, and they're having to make decisions too. When we ask them for millions and millions and millions of dollars, they have a right to say what we do with it, and I don't have a problem with that.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurman. Mr. Perez.
So, I mean, we've all shared, whether here or publicly, about this law. I want to thank Gary and Ben, who's not here, but to me, this law says exactly what I've heard from everybody. This resolution says exactly what I've heard. This law is not a good law as written. And we as Hamilton County are requesting that our legislators understand that the law as written is not good. It's not good to base the future of a student on one test. Retention already happens. I know that teachers are asked to make recommendations of students that ought to be retained. I know those are very hard decisions for teachers as they do it, but as I've spoken to teachers about it, that's a recommendation that's going to be reviewed by parents, that's going to be reviewed by principals, that's going to be reviewed by the school counselors. In other words, the teacher's not saying retain A, B, and C. They are saying, I have this data that I work with every day. I want to make a recommendation to a board of people, including parents, which I always say I don't believe we should be making decisions for parents that parents need to make, much less up there in Nashville making decisions for parents that parents should make. And yet this is it might as well have said if a student's not over 3.5 feet tall, they ought to be retained, right? Like it's a very flat across, here's one rule, we're going to go ahead and establish it for everybody equally the same way. And what we are saying, as I understand, Mr. Keene, in this resolution, is we think the law as written is poorly written. And we would like to request our legislators, as they're going into their session, as they're discussing these amendments, to understand that as a county, as the law is written, it will hurt. I personally believe the law is not holding parents accountable as much as it may have intended. It's not holding the school district accountable as much as the legislators intended. It is holding a third grader accountable. And that's the part that I dislike of this law tremendously. It is telling a third grader, if you don't score, now imagine the stress, talk about test anxiety, right? The stress of a third grader going into one test, understanding that that test may result in their opportunity to join the rest of their classmates into fourth grade. And I've had in my own kids that are incredible testers who come proud because they didn't even have to study. I don't know what it is. I was like that. I had said I could read something the night before. I could test the next day. I would hit it out of the park. Ask me 15 minutes later about it. I had no idea what I just tested. I had this ability to retain short term, that's gone with my age, but I had this ability to retain short term in an amazing way with probably a confidence that came with me to take a test. And I have a kid who is brilliant, capable, hardworking, and in that test is a nervous wreck and is affected by it. And so as this law is written, it is a bad law. And I am hoping that through the amendments being made, through the conversations, but I agree, we all need to be held accountable. The one that I want to protect the most is that 9-year-old kid. That's what I want to protect. Like yes, they're going to be held accountable, but they aren't responsible exclusively for everything along the way, and yet they're the ones who then have to face their classmates the next year explaining why they got retained based on tests. So for me, I hope the state listens to us and the 22 others, and it was pretty unanimous at TSBA that every county was against this. It was pretty unanimous. It seems unanimous to me that every teacher's against a straight out flat law that says every third grader who doesn't score a certain point needs to be retained. I know there are caveats. I know they're not funded, but at the end of the day, that's to me the resolution. This law, as written, is not a good law.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Mrs. Black, and this will be our last comment on this topic.
Hi. You all may not know, but I have a third grader. I have a third grader whose kindergarten year never finished. She came home in March and never went back. I have a third grader who, because of our personal family decisions and the health needs of our family, stayed home and learned on a computer, and she did really well. But it took her a little bit longer to pick up reading than we expected. I have a third grader who is incredibly attached to her friend group. I have a third grader who is incredibly bright. I'm lucky that my third grader has shown on her benchmarks that she's on target and that this law wouldn't affect her. But my concern is that these particular third graders, first of all, have not had a typical go through education as it is. And putting all of this weight on third graders who have already been through so much upheaval in their educational journeys is very concerning to me. But also, it really concerns me that the decision that would impact the social, emotional, and academic development of these children, a decision such as that is so important, such as retention, would be taken away from the people who know these children and these students the best, their parents and their teachers and their administrators and the people who spend hours with them every day on their educational journeys. It is very concerning to me. We talk a lot about parents' rights, and this kind of seems like the opposite of that. But I do want our children to be achieving the goals of reading. I want to get more of our kids on target. I think we have a really great opportunity as this board to make investments earlier, before third grade, because once they get to third grade, it's really kind of late in their reading journey. We have the opportunity to spend dollars to affect this law so that it isn't an issue, and I want us to do that. I think that's really important. But I support this resolution because I think this law is poorly written, and it takes this very important decision-making power away from the people who know these students best, and it puts too much pressure on our 9-year-olds.
Thank you. Dr. Wingate has clicked his button, and I'm going to let him speak.
Thank you. I don't know where I am on this, to be honest. I'm strongly considering, for only the second time in my 7th year on this board, not voting at all on this, and I typically am very critical of people who don't vote, because it's pretty easy, it's yes or no. But I agree. I don't know that the law has been written well. I think the law probably has been constructed under the guise of being expedient as opposed to being excellent. And but I also am not sure that that I wouldn't want to see maybe some changes to a resolution too. I don't know that I agree with all of the resolution either, and so there's struggle there. The struggle is, as Mr. Perez said, you've got students who are going to sit down and take a test, and to be honest, and it wouldn't matter what the subject matter, they're going to pass the test, whether they had the course or didn't have the course. And you're going to have others who can study and study and study and work and work and work, and they're just going to struggle. I've seen that time and time again. And so I think I would rather see multiple points of assessment. I don't know, in my opinion, that the state needs to be solely responsible for that, but I also don't. I know that I don't think that local or LEAs, local education agencies, should be solely responsible for that, and I don't know what that looks like. And I think this is a really tough subject. I think, and I think it needs to be talked about much. I also do think there's a lot of misinformation around reading that gets thrown around a lot. For instance, a lot of people don't know that as bad as you might think reading scores are right now, they're higher than they've been since 1990 across the country. And again, that's not to say that reading proficiencies where they currently stand are acceptable. But I just think there's a lot of misinformation there. And also, not being proficient in third grade doesn't mean you can't read. It just means you can't read at the level that the state has appropriated for a third grader. Again, you can split hairs on that if you want to, but it doesn't mean we have middle schoolers that can't read. It means they don't read at whatever the state standard has been, and it needs to be assessed. So absolutely there's accountability that needs to take place, but I don't know that I feel good about the resolution, and I don't feel good about the law either. So atypical for me sitting on this board, but I'm pretty wishy-washy about the whole thing.
So in closing on this, I challenge our board. We could have put this off, but we really can't. The legislation meets tomorrow, and it meets again next week, and they'll make these decisions. Mr. Connor is there in hopes to give them our copy of the resolution. We have 8 people sitting here. It will take a vote of 6 to pass, regardless that there's only 8 here. So the no seats are no votes, whether they were voting on it as a yes or not. So just to remind you, it will take 6 votes to get this passed. Thank you.
Thank you for the very good dialogue around what I truly believe is a very important topic as well. And this board over the last 7 years since I've been here has spent a lot of time discussing reading performance and how do we do more for our students. So no doubt this is a difficult topic, and so I really appreciate the work and the time that Gary and Ben both have put into this resolution, and of course the overall dialogue of the board. So, okay, with that, that's actually the end of our agenda. So we're going to take a brief break because we've been sitting here for a while, and so we'll come back in 5 minutes and we'll have our voting session, and then we will move on with our day. Thank you.